What is up guys, welcome back to the channel. Today another exciting deck profile from D-BT13 and probably my favorite deck in the entire game right now. It's Lianorn. And since she's got such a big upgrade in this set, I really wanted to make a deck profile as soon as possible for her. But it took some time for me to get my pieces because there's promos and there's a new boss monster obviously. So I managed to get everything this weekend and test it out at locals, and man, it's everything I wanted it to be. So after we had her emo phase, we went into the, I guess it's Italian opera phase. Either way, these two bosses now give the deck so much variety, so much fun to play, and so I totally just want to get into the deck profile and show you what she has got to offer right now with her new stuff. So as you can see, my right line remains the same. If you've seen my last deck profile for Lianorn Masque, you'll notice that I still run the Rora plus Rectina right line. It's my favorite way to go. I have seen people go for another Rora in the right line because you get a little more flexible early pressure. But I do like the ability of Rectina to revive a Grade 1 I discard for my right deck. Because generally, nothing really in my hand wants to go to drop, and so if I have the ability to just throw away a Grade 1 and get it back later, that really gives me a lot of room to be flexible in the early game. And then I still decide to go with the Roroa right line for the first two slots because the free plant token is just really easy to use. It works going first and going second, unlike the actual Lianorn right line. And so for me, this is still the easiest, the most straightforward, and just the most versatile right line, I guess, you can use, because just having a plant token always makes the first swing good, makes the second swing good. You don't really need to commit anything and still get a lot of value. And then obviously in the right deck, we still run the Lianorn we got from set 6. She's a pretty old card by now. But yeah, she's still really good. Her counterblast skill is one of the few effects we really still use every time we get the chance to. And her actual boosting skill is also just really good. But I don't think I have to explain the right line any further, because these cards, they're well known by now. I think we can go straight into our Grade 3s, because that's where some changes have happened. And so yes, we still run our Lianorn masks, and I'll actually put them all down, because we run 4 copies. So unlike some people expected, you can, well, I guess you can run a pure Lianorn Vivace or Vivace build, however you like to pronounce it. I think Vivace is actually the correct way to say it because that's Italian, but I don't really speak Italian, so what do I know? But for Lianorn Masque, she's like a really strong unit. She has access to the Persona Right power, so if you go second, you have an explosive turn, and I kind of believe this deck wants to go second, because going into this and then into Vivace really feels like it's the strongest thing we can do right now. And the extra draw is good, the ability to retire something of our opponent. Most opponents don't really see it coming because they're like, Stoichea doesn't have retire, but Lianorn does, so just being able to remove this and just get a lot of value out of it feels really nice. And one thing I actually haven't checked yet, but I believe we can do, is we can remove a Lianorn with a different card name. So you can actually remove Vivace from your drop and get more value out of it. So if you have multiple in the early game, you can just totally throw it to drop, wait it. If you don't really find a second one, you can totally just use her ability to remove this, pop something from your opponent and revive something. So just having these in the deck really makes Masque so much stronger. And she also really synergizes with the new cards because she also gets a lot of value out of the plussing that they give to the deck. So yeah, I still really love Lianorn Masque, and obviously she has a super cool aesthetic. But she passed the emo phase, she went into opera singing, and that's where Lianorn Vivace comes in. So yeah, I'm gonna put the masks aside. These are also Grade 3s we run. I only run 2 because I don't really like seeing the card all too much. You need to see 1 copy, but we actually run a searcher for that, which you'll see later. So this might go up to 3 copies, but I can't say for sure yet. Like if we're still pre the 50 card main deck, yeah, then this can go above 2 copies because you just don't have the room for it. But in the 50 card main deck version, you could actually go for more. And the build I'm showing you today, I actually forgot to mention at the start, but this will be a build that will work after the 19th of January when it changes, where you have to run 50 cards in your main deck and have a 4 card right deck. And so I'm still going for 2, but you can totally just slot a third one if you feel that there's some inconsistency for you when finding this card. Okay, so now to the big new Lianorn, and she's the crazy one. I'm not gonna explain the skills of the old cards. I'm just gonna focus on Leonor now, on Vivace, because she has a really interesting skill. So her first thing is Unison Dress. And this is a new ability. You get this when she rides over a unit in the Unison Dress state, or a unit with Lianorn in a different card name that's not yet in the Unison Dress state. And when you do, you draw cards and you go into Unison Dress for the rest of the fight. So it's kind of like Persona Ride, but you don't get plus 10k to the front row. Instead, she gets this special state, kind of like Final Rush. But it lasts until end of fight, so for the rest of the turns after, you don't have to rewrite every time to unlock the Unison Dress, it just stays there. But you do get the draw if you write. And she does have the Persona Ride icon, so if you rewrite on top of her, she still gets Persona Ride, but as you'll probably see when you start testing the deck, generally when you write these cards, definitely if it's on top of Masque, you will finish the game that turn, because the power of this card is so good that you don't really need much after anymore. So her second skill is when she attacks while in the Unison Dress state, and that's why you can't run her in the right deck, because you won't be in Unison Dress yet. While she's not boosted, stand all of your rear guards, so every single one of them, then boost her with all of those rear guards. If she is boosted with 3 or more, at the end of the battle, counterblast 1, choose 3 of your units, stand them, they get plus 5k, and drive -1. And what's special about that is that she says units, so she can just pick the entire front row, including herself, and stand. And that's what she gets, actually 3 drives in total, with 2 Vanguard swings. And when she's boosted by the entire field, her power is just so insane that most people have to PG that, or they're just gonna have to take it. And then post restand she becomes 18 if you didn't put any triggers on her. But generally, just having 18 and an extra drive if your opponent's at 5 is already a pretty good number, because they can't really guard it with just 1 trigger, because then they'll say 1 to pass, and if you check that trigger, you just win the game. So Vivace, or Vivace, however you like to pronounce it, is a super good card, but it's your finisher card. And so we still focus on going into Lianorn Masque as much as possible, because she also just gets so much payoff from these new cards. So this is it for the grade 3s. We'll probably get into these again when we go over the combo segment, because we can show a turn for both of them. As for the grade 2s, we have a new grade 2, and it's one of the strongest cards it has gotten. It's a promo, so that's the only sad part about it, but I was lucky enough to get it at locals. So it's Luster Import Dragon, and this card has a really good ability where if you have 2 or more back row grade 1 or less rear guards, he gets boost and plus 5k. So this allows us to get an easier time to fill our field with boosters, because obviously the back row always needs to have the ability to boost if we're on base Lianorn, or well, actually even on Vivace it's really good to have back rows that can boost, because she also stands everything before she boosts the Vanguard. So if they're already rested from boosting the first time, you actually get double value from them. But then his second ability, and that's where the big buff to Lianorn Masque also comes from. If he's stood by the ability of your Vanguard with Granfia or Lianorn in the card name, and if your Vanguard's power is 33k or greater, Soul Blast 1, draw a card, and he gets plus 5 until end of turn. And so this 33k requirement is something it's peanuts for Lianorn, because she's always huge. Like, you don't really have to try, and you'll always swing right around 40k. So this will always trigger. And by the way, the way it's worded, it's actually not an issue with Lianorn Masque either, because obviously she stands at the end of the battle, but because it's before the close step, the power from the boost is still applied, and that means that she will be above 33k generally when she will be standing both front rows. So if you have double of these in the front row, you can Soul Blast 2, draw 2 cards, you probably Soul Blast out your Lianorn, and then next turn, if you don't rewrite into Vivace, you can remove this from the game, get extra value from it, because your opponent is probably gonna deal with your field in some way, and you plus so much from it. It's amazing. And so this is one of my favorite cards they added to the deck. The other one is in the grade 1 slot, and I hope to show it off later. So this is the mandatory card we still have to run to search the Masque. It's the Dragon Tree Wretch, Depth Evaluate. He's our grade 2 play still, Like if you're on grade 2, the only other thing besides your right line is just you call this down, you pay your counterblast, your soul blast, you get your dragon tree marker, and you search for a Mask of Hydrogram. And then generally you try to mulligan to find your Lianorn Masque if you're going second, so you have access to it. And that gives you that means you generally just discard the Masque if you ride into grade 3. So that's how I like to play. And the Dragon Tree marker, it still just really works because if it's in the front row, you're still gonna try and do that single turn on your Leonor Masque, so you're gonna get value from it. Once you go into Vivace, the Dragon Tree marker becomes useless, but at least you got your benefits from it in the earlier turn. And you only really want to see one copy of this, but since this has shield value and the Masque of Hydrogram doesn't, and we don't really want to resolve this to search things, I've decided to run 4 of this and only 2 of this, instead of like less copies of this and like 4 masks, because I don't like orders in my deck. They feel bricks. At least these can be used as discard fodder or as shield value, like generally as shield value I guess, while these would only be used as discard fodder. So I like this split. And the deck does counterblast a lot. It can counterblast a lot, but it has access to countercharge now, so it's less of an issue. So that's it for the grade 2 slots. We then go over to grade 1s, and as you can see, we run a good amount of grade 1s, but this is also because of the 50 card version main deck. I'll try and show you what cards I would cut if we had to, and it's mostly pretty easy. So this is the entire grade 1 lineup, and if you had to cut 4 cards from your deck, although I would have to look because I don't really like cutting anything, probably run 1 less Depth Elite. You cut these 2 and then discard, so this would be what you remove from the deck, these 4 cards, but because we have the room now, we can totally put them in, and I'll totally go over them. So let's go with Prosper first. He's one of the old cards I re-included because I have the extra space. His soul charge is not as mandatory anymore, you don't really need it. If you're stuck on base Lianorn for some reason, this can actually be super clutch, because if you revive him with any skill, but generally it will be a Dianta or your right line, he soul charges, and that means you got soul for Lianorn skill, but also still soul for your Luster Import or your Depth Elites. So he does help, but he's really situational, and he's still a really amazing booster, because every time he boosts, he can give himself or a unit in the same column plus 5k. And so this could be really interesting on the Vivace turn, because you'll be boosting with this before your Vanguard restances and boost with this again. So you can really power up something in the front row with this. And so on base Lianorn, it's also still really good, because you easily get to power requirements needed for skills. And so yeah, he's a really good booster. He can go up to 18k by himself, or just give 10k to something else generally. Then we have 3 copies of Dianta. She's a great one, and that's probably why we pick her over any of the other revival cards. She's a body by herself, but she revives anything really for a counterblast, so it helps in giving us consistency to the deck. I have noticed I don't really use her all that often, and if I've used her, it's generally just because I want to hit more power. Like, my field would be full, but I'm like, this is the 13k, so why not just call this down and call something like this again, which we'll go over later. Or like, the nice thing you could do is call her and then revive Rosarian Fairy and like kill her off to get 2 plant tokens. Obviously it's less power than 13k, but it fills the field with less bodies, with less cards committed from hand, giving you more bodies. So she's really good, but she's really situational, and it's one of those cards that really fills slots in a very effective way. So Dianta you can never go wrong with, but you don't really need her. So if you see multiple copies in the early game, you just start pitching them. You don't really need them. Then my new favorite card in the deck, Olentis. She's amazing for one single reason, and you really can't read it on the FR version, so I'll put the normal version first. So she has an ability where if your Vanguard is Lianorn, she gets plus 2k. But if your Vanguard is in the Unison Dress state, it gets 5k instead. So it's a 13k booster or a 10k booster, both of which are pretty amazing. But then the second skill says, at the end of the turn, if your Vanguard was boosted a total of 3 times this turn, which is automatically with any of the Lianorns, as long as you have a full back row, they'll have 3 times boost, so she'll generally always trigger. You can retire her at the end of the turn to draw a card, and if you have no face-up cards, counter charge. This means that we can be really aggressive with our counterblasts, use the skill of the base Lianorn, use the skill of Lianorn Masque, use the skill of the Depty Well Lead, and just get our resources just going. And at the end of the turn we countercharge, we draw, and so if we see a couple of copies of this card, we're just certain we're gonna draw into our finisher, which is the Lianorn Vivace. And so I really like her, because if you have just 2 of them on the field, knowing that they'll both go away for value, so you can actually commit the cards you want to commit for next turn, is really cool. And the countercharge has helped out a couple of times, so really great cards. I guess I kind of underestimated how useful this was in anything besides the Vivace. I felt like it was really meant for that because it had the Unison Dress word on it, but that's so wrong. It's great on any turn where you're on Lianorn. And so this is probably the best one to discard with the right line, because I guess you could commit it early, but like if you revive it on the turn you go into like your Masque, or if you have to be on base Lianorn, you're gonna get the draw, and that's gonna feel really good. Then obviously Rosarium Fairy, the finisher we saw in Granfia, but it also works in Lianorn, and surprisingly it almost works better in Lianorn, because Lianorn has the plussing to sustain this, it has tools to revive this, and it likes to have just plant tokens in the back row too as boosters for the Vanguard, because generally that just works. Because if you have two plant tokens boosting Lianorn and then 1 Elentis, you're also at 33k, so honestly that's really good. And so the nice thing about this card is that it works on the Vivace turn, but also on the Lianorn Masque turn, because she needs your opponents to be at grade 3. So that's why you kind of want to go second, because this card is just instantly live. But it says, like for those who don't know, because it's a really amazing card, like the first skill says when she's placed, you retire 1 of your other rear guards and you call 2 plant tokens. It's up to 2, so you can decide to only call 1 if you don't want to overcall anything. But she has the ability to become 3 bodies on the field by sacking off 1, so she gives you 2 bodies, I suppose. Then, when she attacks, and if you have a Vanguard with Granfia or Lianorn, and your opponent is at grade 3, choose 1 of your other back row units and increase this unit's power by that unit's power until end of battle. And so there's the nice thing, that if she's in a column with, let's say, your Prosper, or even better, which is what generally is gonna happen with your Luster Impart, because he has access to boost, is we'll boost with this column. This will have already 5k from your requirement, so this is a 23k column, but then because her effect activates, she gets another 15, and so this becomes 38. That's without persona rights bonuses or any triggers or anything. So just 38 by themselves together is really nice. So that's 48 if you're on Lianorn Masque, and if you then see any triggers, because this will only be 23 by the way, on Vivace it will be 38. But if you then see any triggers, you can always stack them on him, and she'll always just copy that power. So that's really cool. And so she is the finisher of the deck. You just want to have 2 copies of her on your final turn, because they'll be the biggest things you can call on the Vivace turn. And that's also why Dianta reviving her is really good. But you don't have to be shy to use her on the Lianorn Masque turn, because she'll also be really amazing by then. And that's it for all the main deck units. We still have 4 PGs to talk about, but there's really nothing to say. Just 4 base PGs and 1 Elementaria Sanctitude. We're not running Great Force, so we have totally access to this. And then for the trigger lineup. And for those who have seen deck profiles from me, I do generally have a bit of a special trigger lineup. If I do so say myself, I run 5 crits, 4 of the Pomera and 1 of the Jackalope. I feel like those are the most fitting ones for the deck. Then 3 draw triggers, 4 heal triggers, and 3 front triggers. And so most people would drop the front triggers for more crits, and I would be totally fine with that. I understand why you would want more crits, because if you have a Resending Vanguard, why not just put more crits on them, or why not put more crits on this big, massive Vanguard swing? And the reason I still like fronts is because if you're Vanguard, and specifically Vivace is really good for this, if she restands, and like you're generally gonna be wanting to putting triggers on one of your back row units, because then the first swing your Vanguard is doing is getting all the power from that unit still, but also both Rosariums will be able to copy the power. Well, so the thing is that triggers will want to go here. But if we check a front, instead of having to put it here, we just get the power on the front row, and it's kind of the same thing. Instead of just copying power, it's already on the front row. And so your restanding Vivace will be 18 by herself, but then if we check the front, she'll be 28. 28, one drive. It's a magic number. Like, nobody is gonna tell me that's a bad number. And this has a lot of shield value. We draw a lot of cards, so just having this in hand feels really nice because we can preserve even more hand by having good cards. One of the worst things to happen is where you have like a bunch of draw triggers in hand and your opponent swinging at you and you have to dump this to just guard a 20k shield attack. That just feels bad. So I'm such a big fan of fronts, but I have to say that because we're so piece reliant, having draw triggers in the deck feels needed. And really, if you see any of these go to damage, you're so happy because you need the pieces for that next turn just to get the club back. This deck draws a bunch, so you do get a big hand, but even then, you just like to have all the options. Definitely, if you feel like you have to finish, you generally don't want to be staying on Lianorn Masque, you want to be able to go into Vivace, and so if you just lucky draw into the Vivace and just be able to play it, that's the best feeling there is. And then one more thing about all of that is that because of this finisher turn you do, where you have 6 attacks with one super massive attack and then one smaller attack, but then I guess both rear guards are gonna be massive as well after they've restood. You kind of just don't need crits to win. You just do enough attacks, you make enough big numbers to just finish out the game generally. And so I don't think crits are really necessary. Like, you're gonna win regardless on that turn. And the nice thing is also we still have the Stoichea OT, which is obviously a crit, a draw, a heal, and a front. So it counts for any of these, but I generally, if I'm looking at it, it's like it's a 6 crit rerun. So having 6 crits in the deck should be enough by my standards. You're not gonna crit sack, but like honestly that's not a fun way to win anyway. You're gonna win by being consistent and having the tools to get to your finisher turn, because that's the biggest thing we need in this deck, is just survive long enough so you can totally blow out your opponent. And that's it for the main deck. So I'll try to go over a quick combo, but as for ride up, you know how it's gonna go. So when you ride into your Aurora, you get your plant token in the back row center, then we'll ride up into Rectina, and we generally try to take at least 1 damage here, so we can resolve our Depth Iwelite, which is Counter Blast 1, Soul Blast 1, and I generally Soul Blast out the Great 1 because it can be revived by Rectina, but it honestly doesn't matter because her own skill Soul Blasts as well. So I guess that's just a little superstition where I need to have it in drop already, but that's such a bad idea actually, because if you play against Narukami, you should totally swap it around. So you're obviously better off just Soul Blasting the Great Zero in this case, so this is Save and Soul. You get yourself a Dragon Tree marker and you search for your Masque of Hydrogram. And I have to search for it myself. Oh, there it is. So we get it, and then hopefully in your mulligan you managed to get yourself a copy of Leonor Masque. So if you're going into grade 3, we can discard this right into base Leonor. And best case scenario, our opponent just gives us 2 more CB. Like this is what we really want. But if they only give us 1, you can't actually use base a Leonor skill and you have to forgo it to just go into Leonor Masque. But let's say they're really happy to see us and they want to give us all the CB in the world. So we can go like this, and let's say we've intercepted with this guy. Although that's unlikely, I guess, if we're going so hard. Right, what else can we put? Like, let's say we've discarded this for right deck, that's the ideal. Alright, setup has been made. So we rode into our grade 3 by discarding the Masque, which allows us to activate the skill of the grade 2, Soul Blasting a card, and reviving a grade 1 from drop. And if you have anything like this in drop, that's perfect, because you can then just revive it, and its skill would be Life. And because we're already on a Lianorn Vanguard, this also gets +2, so it's a 10k already. We then, because we have enough CB, can use base Lianorn skill. We counterblast 1, we draw a card, and then we're forced to superior call a card. And so we could totally spear call Prosper here, which would allow us to soul charge if we needed to. If we go into a Lianorn Masque, we obviously have enough, but if we didn't, where we now have only one soul for our base Lianorn, it would be really cool to get that going. Right, so we're not gonna soul charge right now because it's not needed. We'll activate the skill of the Masque of Hydrogram, putting it into soul, and Persona Riding into Lianorn Masque, which gives us a 10k to the front row and another draw. I'm actually not keeping track of the draws. Let's see. I'll do it like this. So we had one draw from our base Lianorn skill and now a draw from Persona Ride. We can then commit these two to the field and they'll both get plus 5k because of their own skills, because we have 2 or more grade 1 or less in the back row. And then this one will gain another 5k because we're on a dragon tree marker. And then we can go into our attack step. We'll go like this. This is 25k. And then we'll go like this. And this one will be 30k, which are both really good numbers. I guess this one is a bit lackluster, but it's totally fine. And then our big Lianorn Masque can go for her swing. She goes unboosted, but then her skill triggers, allowing us to boost with 3 standing back rows. And so here it's important that you check for the power requirement, but obviously because we have the Persona Ride power, even just these just the Persona Ride plus the Atlantis booster is already 33k, so it's totally fine. So we can trigger Prosper's effect to give a 5k to the unit in front. Right, so we perform our drive checks, and let's say we do total blanks because it's not as important. We'll check 2 copies of our next card, so these go to hand. And then at the end of the battle, before the close step, so boosting power is still applied, we counterblast 1 to stand both of these. And then both of their effects activate because they were stood by the effect of our Lianorn Vanguard. They allow us to Soul Blast 1. So we'll be Soul Blasting any of these really to get 5k to both of them, and then draw us a card for each. So we'll draw another 2 cards. Right, and then these can go again for really nice numbers. So now they're equal because of the power of Prosper. So this will be 35k and this will be another 35k. And then during the end phase, the effect of Atlantis would still activate. She'll retire herself, which gives us another draw and a counter charge. And so obviously we did commit a couple of cards to the field, but it did leave us with a nice 7 card hand. And that's assuming we had to commit literally every card in our hand, because I don't know how many cards we're gonna have at this point in the game unless I do a game from start. So this is a pretty good hand, I think, to have. Like, the odds are that you're gonna at least see a single copy of Vivace by now, because you will have decked it quite a bit too. We're pretty much ready for our next turn, and if any of these cards survive, that's amazing. If they don't, that kind of makes it harder. But like, if you have this plus your Lianorn, you're probably good. Like, the cards I did put in my hand were a bit by accident, I suppose, but I did actually just put the entire next turn in here, so we're totally ready for whatever is to come. So let's say our opponent magically kills everything, and we have to go in without any extra bodies. On this turn, we'll also just have taken 2 more damage because we're trying to win this game anyway. We'll be riding into Lianorn Vivace, and Vivace's effect activates to give us Unison Dress. So it's not Persona Ride, it's Unison Dress, and that means we get a draw. That's all, just a random draw. Let's say we draw into a Masque, which is not the greatest. But now, obviously, Unison Dress is active, which will allow us to do the restand play. We still have our plant token, which is really nice. And worst case scenario, you could totally just, with the Rosarian Fairies, build an entire field of plant tokens where you would just go call the Rosarian Fairy, kill the plant token to make 2 plant tokens, and then call the Rosarian Fairy, kill the plant token to make 2 plant tokens. But generally, because you'll have enough cards on hand to make a better field, that's not what you will be doing. You'll probably be calling as many good cards to your field as possible, and so any Elentis is amazing. And so this is one of the best setups we can make. If we, in this case, do have a Dianta, that's also one card less we have to commit, where we can just revive or Luster Impart from drop if we don't have it. So she kind of substitutes for anything really in this case. So if we get this setup, both of them actually get plus 5k now because we're in unison dress instead of just having a Lianorn Vanguard, and he also gets plus 5k. So the Rosariums have a perfect target to copy, but the nice thing here is that if we're attacking, since the Vanguard resets everything, we can immediately attack with the entire column. And so this is 13k, so but because she doubles it, because she copies it, it's actually 26 plus 8, which is 34, I believe. So 34, it's the same as 33. It's not amazing, but it's more than enough actually. I'm not sure why I said it's not amazing. It feels amazing. So then we can go here, boosted by Luster Impart. This one is easier to calculate because it's 15, so it becomes 30, so that's 38. And then our Vanguard swings unboosted. Her skill activates, standing every rearguard, and then boosting with every rearguard. And so at this point, his effect triggers because he was stood by the effect of a Lianorn Vanguard, and that Lianorn Vanguard now has more than enough power. You can Soul Blast one and draw yourself another card. And he also just gets another plus 5k, so that allows us to add more power. Obviously, the Rosariums right now feel like bad booster because they become 8ks. So it's 16 plus 26, that's 42, plus 20, which is 62, plus 13, which is 75k Twin Drive, which is really nice. And I haven't really seen any triggers, so let's say we see a heal trigger and another copy of our Vivace. Then we can heal one. And the nice thing now is that because the Rosariums will be copying power, and because our Vivace is also just getting boosted by everything, obviously your opponent is gonna have to PG this because there's no way they can hard guard it, but we can totally put the power here, and because it's being boosted, she also just gains the power. Right, at the end of the battle, we counterblast one, which allows her to restand 3 of our units. They all get plus 5k, and 9 out of 10, this is gonna be your entire front row, and she loses 1 drive. Okay, then the nice thing now is that because this still has a drive but doesn't restand anything, you can just go Vanguard again, and this will only be 18k because there's no way she is getting boosted. And this is where we get super lucky and check our front trigger, which would make her 28k, and that would be really nice, but these also would get boosted. So yeah, let's say that wasn't really a trigger because this swing is just there to make your opponent have to commit more. And then these can both go for a really good number because this is now 13, but because we saw a single trigger on our triple drive, this is a 30k boost now. So this is 43, and then this one goes again for 43. And at the end of the turn, you're probably still gonna have a really good hand, and you hopefully have good odds to survive this. And so yeah, these would both still trigger to give you draws, this trigger to give you a draw. So Lianorn is really, really good right now, and I can't stress this enough, this is my favorite deck right now, and I didn't expect to get this much fun out of Standard. I have been testing many decks over the period that we've been playing Standard, and this is, I think, the first time that I felt like Standard has some decks that are more interesting than other formats. Even though that some of the other decks I faced against feel really overwhelming sometimes because you're a bit slower because you're waiting for this turn 4 finish. Well, turn 5 in some cases. But if you get there, you're overwhelming them so much. Like, you just have to get to your turn 3 generally, and then the game starts to go in your favor. But obviously there's going to be a lot of decks in the format that are just going to try to outrush you because they have really good turn 2 plays. They have access to a lot of critical pressure. And that's probably what the format is going to be like, because we have decks like Youthberg and Lianorn that are a bit well, I guess that Uberg is actually really fast. Drajewelt and Lianorn, who are a bit slower, who have to go into this win condition, but like have a really good way to get there, against the decks that are a bit faster and that are just trying to punch you before you actually get to your win con. And so, I hope you like the deck profile. If you're just like me, you like combo decks, you like having the options of going into 2 different bosses and having a lot of draw power so you can overwhelm your opponent over time, this is the perfect deck for you, and I think it's a great investment to make right now. So I hope you enjoyed watching, and I see you in the next one. Bye!